Good morning and welcome to Quick Connect. We are going to get started in just a few moments. Before we begin, I just want to let our audience know that this session is being recorded. If you have any questions or comments throughout the talk, we invite you to drop those into either the comment section of the Facebook page, or if you're joining us on Zoom, we'd invite you to ask any questions into the Q&A feature. Today, we are going to be talking about social entrepreneurship. This year has been challenging for many small businesses. And if there's one thing that we've learned is that doing good and investing in communities and lending a hand along the way to help our neighbors and our businesses is creating a lot of change in our communities. Mahatma Gandhi famously said, "Be the change you wish to see in the world." And so today on Quick Connect, we're going to be talking with some guest speakers. I'm excited to announce that we have Spud Marshall from My Creative Community and Three Dots, as well as Eric Foley and Kelly Asbury from Smeal College of Business. They're going to present some great tips on social entrepreneurship for your current business models, or if you're starting a business as well. So with that being said, I'd like to have my guest speakers go ahead and come on camera. And we'll go ahead and get started for today. Good morning, and how are you?
Good morning.
Doing well.
Good. Well, let's get started by just meeting our panel. And so I'd like for each of you to kind of introduce yourselves and tell a little bit about your work, what you do. And so we'll start with Spud. Spud, would you like to introduce yourself and tell a little bit about what you do and where you're located and those kind of things?
Sure. Yeah, I'm excited to be here. I am based in State College, Pennsylvania, so have been here for the last 10 years or so doing my work professionally. And then prior to that was a student for my undergrad. And a lot of my work focuses on how do you support social innovation and creative change making in communities around the world. And so I wear multiple hats. So I often describe each hat as a way to help kind of anchor my career a little bit for folks. So one hat that I wear is a consultancy called My Creative Community, and it's all about helping various organizations and companies and foundations figure out how do you support really thriving, engaging spaces for people to be active participants of the communities that they're a part of. So I get to do all kinds of really great like experience design and facilitation work with a bunch of clients on that end. And then the other hats that I wear are as a social entrepreneur here in State College. And so over the last 10 years or so, have had the pleasure to run a couple different ventures. So started back in 2010, launched New Leaf, which is now one of the co-working spaces here in the center region based in the Borough Building. Does a lot of work with engaging local government and the community and figuring out how do you create really great shared workspaces. So that started back in 2010. Then went off and launched CoSpace, which is a 20-person intentional community for young creative change makers and entrepreneurs and folks that want to do good in the world. We create a space for them to live and build community and actually get to eat together for a year at a time. So that's been another fun project that's been running since about 2013. And then more recently, what a lot of folks know, some of my recent work is with an organization called Three Dots. And Three Dots is focused on catalyzing the arts and innovation scene in State College. So how do you spur more creativity around the region? We give out $1,000 grants every month for people to do kind of creative community building work. And so, yeah, multiple hats, wearing nonprofits, for-profits, helping a whole host of other organizations. So super excited to dive into the world of social entrepreneurship with folks today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Spud. And I have a couple of your links to drop into the chat, but if you wouldn't mind, if you are able to, while the other two introduce, if you could drop some of those links to some of the possible ones that I missed, that would be great. So people can reference some of your work, that would be great. Next up, can we have Kelly? Can you introduce yourself and where you work and what kind of your passion is?
Sure. So I'm Kelly Asbury, and I know everybody here on the presentation through the community or even through the Smeal College of Business, whether it's social entrepreneurship or creativity or just business in general. So really happy to be here. So my day job, I guess, is Director of Alumni Career Services at the Smeal College of Business. And by evening and weekend, I'm a graduate student in the Corporate Innovation and Entrepreneurship program in collaboration with Smeal and World Campus. So I'm in my second year of that program with a primary concentration in engineering innovation and a secondary concentration in business analytics. So Over the past year, I've been applying a great deal of what I've been learning in the specialty master's program at SMEAL to the career coaching and virtual programs presentations that we do at SMEAL, and really starting to get into consulting and coaching with early stage startups. I am particularly interested in diversity, equity, and inclusion. So women, minority, international students. Just really excited to work with young entrepreneurs that have a diverse and different background and perspective in the world. And I grew up in State College, and I lived in Colorado and British Columbia, Canada for many years. So the social kind of outdoor community-based entrepreneurship is something that I've always been engaged in, whether it's starting my own small business or patroning other small businesses, being engaged in the startup community. A great deal of what I do personally is meshed with professionals. So I'm excited to be here today.
Yeah, we're excited to have you. And I'm excited for this panel because I know that each of you is really passionate about social entrepreneurship and have such unique perspectives to offer. So Eric, can you introduce yourself, tell a little bit about your role, and why this is an inspiring topic for you as well?
Great. Thank you. It's great to be here. And my name is Eric Foley. I'm the director of the Center for the Business of Sustainability at SMEAL College of Business. I'm also an instructor in management organization. And I'm a frequent, local shopper and support all of our local and regional businesses. And I first just want to say, I think for all of us, certainly, but, my heart goes out to, the businesses that have struggled. Many we won't see on the other side of the pandemic, which is quite heartbreaking. So I just know, for the business owners, who have an opportunity to listen in or watch this, just acknowledge what can you say? We've run out of words this year, but the incredibly difficult circumstances for you, your family, and the work, your legacy, the work of your life. So just to have a lot of respect for that. Hopefully you can gain some, some additional insights, from what we can share today. So my work at the business school is partially, we have a social venture initiative where we work with local social entrepreneurs, and we engage students in that. We also do some work with larger, multinational companies around environmental and social innovation. We have somewhere around 15 to 20 researchers in the college that look at sustainability through a number of different perspectives, whether it's supply chain, accounting, marketing, consumer behavior, risk management, finance, sort of the whole ESG impact investing space. So lots happening in the college. And I should also say that we're part of, a huge network at Penn State of folks in every college and every campus too that are focused on sustainability. So encourage people to go to sustainability.psu.edu, and through that you might be able to find just about everything sustainability wise that's happening at Penn State. I'll just end by saying I think my particular interest in this topic of social entrepreneurship started, I guess, with my own entrepreneurial ventures myself in the Peace Corps in South America and Paraguay, helping to start a environmental education center, the first in the country with a successful business person down there. And then a renewable energy center at another university, local food systems work in inner city Seattle. And so, kind of living it, the difficulty of social entrepreneurship is, I think, that you have to run a profitable enterprise as well as address some kind of social or ecological issue. And just running a profitable enterprise is very difficult. When you layer on, I think, the innovation opportunity around social impact, that's exciting, but it's also challenging at the same time. So excited to share a little bit about what we're doing at SMEAL and how we might be able to help local and regional businesses. So thanks for the invitation to participate.
Yeah, thank you so much. And you hit right on the point a little bit about how we're outreaching to small businesses, and they really have been struggling. But the inspiration for this talk came from them, because we see so many small businesses in the midst of struggle reaching out to community and doing good things. And so that is kind of the inspiration for this whole talk is, what have we've learned a lot from watching businesses, and so that we can continue to just inspire this change in the communities. So maybe we could start out a little bit by backing up many, many years and talking about the history of social entrepreneurship. We talked a little bit about where it really began. And so maybe Eric, you had kind of alluded to this at the beginning of, where did social entrepreneurship really start, get its footing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd just say maybe three things briefly, and then Kelly and Spud can jump in. I mean, because I don't want to go all academic here, but I guess in some ways I would say that social entrepreneurship never started because it's always been with us. In the sense that business has always provided benefit to people. The access to products, access to healthcare, education, food, things that they need for their daily lives, and provided meaningful jobs. So in a sense, we in that regard, you could say that social entrepreneurship is a name for something that we've always done. So that's important to mention. I would say, I guess the second thing is that the kind of the modern manifestation of social entrepreneurship, some people trace back to the 80s and 90s with cause-related marketing and companies realizing that there was an increase of concern about social injustice issues, environmental issues. Of course, this is decades after the civil rights movement and the first Earth Day in 1970, but that there was a increasing awareness and concern about those issues. And so companies started to at least need to appear as though they cared about their social and ecological impact, the whole kind of triple bottom line perspective. Some would look at that and be somewhat critical that maybe it wasn't an authentic perspective, it was more marketing and PR. But you do have companies like Interface in the carpet industry. Patagonia is a well-known example, who can trace their beginnings back to that same time, the 80s and into the 90s. And then the last thing I think you could point to in terms of where social entrepreneurship came from is international development. So in other words, social entrepreneurship is as an alternative to just the sort of, you might say, the paternalism of just giving people and flooding markets with, whether it's grains or food or, and in that way, having the inadvertent effect of kind of collapsing those markets. Why don't we instead actually help and provide resource and access to markets and help people, with their entrepreneurial ventures instead of creating dependence on first world. So I would say those are the three perspectives I would have on where this topic came from.
Yeah, yes, Spud or Kelly, do you have any historical insight onto really how we started having this conversation? I like your point, Eric, that it's always been around. And anything to add, Spud or Kelly, to that?
I guess the piece that I would just add is there's probably multiple genesis points, right? So I think Eric touched on from the lens of working for a corporation, right, or a company perhaps, right, noticing, hey, we can actually be selling our product, doing our services, and do this kind of cause marketing, right? And that kind of like evolved a bit into the social entrepreneurship space. I think another genesis point might have also been from perhaps like the nonprofit charity perspective, and right, the soup kitchen. The line to the soup kitchen is never getting any shorter, right? And we just keep funneling resources, and the line continues to be at the same point. And so I think from that perspective, people were thinking about, we haven't thought about the power of business and enterprise as a potential solution to solving these things that have typically existed in the charity realm. And so that's another genesis point, I think, for the social entrepreneurship space. Another name that gets thrown around a lot when talking about the history of this field is Muhammad Yunus with the Grameen Bank, and providing like microcredit, microloans to specifically groups of women, and being able to see how he can get a return, because oftentimes access to capital was a challenge for a lot of like local artisans and things like that. So there's lots of different genesis points, either in the financial institutions, in the charity world, in the business world. So, and they've all kind of culminated into this phrase, social entrepreneurship, which gets lumped in a lot. And I think sometimes we get hung up in the academic definitions of things, but at the end of the day, it's, how do you create good in the world? And to what degree does business and enterprise serve as a vehicle to help accelerate that good? So.
Yeah, those are great points. And I think we'll touch a little bit more on how businesses, or larger businesses in particular, have used social entrepreneurship as, I think Eric had described as a marketing campaign, and in how, these genesis points, as you describe them, have maybe diluted what it could really be about. Kelly, how about you, just to kind of re-loop back to the history point, do you have any definition of, or even maybe a personal context of, like, this is when I knew what social entrepreneurship was?
I guess just to add to that, when I think about the kind of the original culture, or just the values that originated out of social entrepreneurship, I think about entrepreneurs who maybe had more of a collectivist approach to the work they were doing than individualism. So I think entrepreneurs that see a problem and have a solution, but then there are those that have a more collectivist, they're thinking about the greater good and the social good, about those that are interconnected around them. So I think cultures that are more open to that collectivist theory than individualistic may have had a part in where that social entrepreneurism came from as well. So that could be a psychological and a cultural component, as well as just kind of a business model.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think we're going to touch a little bit more on some of that later in the talk. And I think one of the best ways to really start out is by maybe talking about larger businesses, because a lot of my audience is small businesses. But if we just kind of give some examples of social entrepreneurship from a larger business standpoint, good or bad, maybe we can start to define a little bit what social entrepreneurship really means. So, what is social entrepreneurship? Does anybody have examples of larger businesses that really fit the definition of social entrepreneurship?
So that's an open question, right? There are so many examples depending on what type of field and industry that you're trying to get into. I think one of the helpful things is, again, when we're talking about social entrepreneurship, there is a spectrum and a scale in terms of how people define it, and people will probably argue about that. I don't think that's useful getting into those conversations as much, but one of the groups that comes to mind for me that is not well known, and so it doesn't answer that part of your question, but is a company called Barrio. And they are based down in Peru, I believe, but they make skateboards from recycled fishing nets. And so there was this big problem in Peru, an environmental problem, where just fishing nets were polluting the bays, and they just kept having this environmental problem. There were charities, nonprofits out there trying to figure out a solution to it. And they ended up coming up with this ability to turn the fishing nets into a plastic material that they could turn into skateboards. They've now partnered with groups like Patagonia. I know that was mentioned earlier as kind of one of the pioneers in this space. And so it's this kind of really interesting example of their central value proposition was, we want to tackle this social or environmental problem. And I think on one end of the social entrepreneurship scale, you have businesses that exist solely to solve that social or environmental problem. On the other end of the spectrum, maybe kind of a contrasting example, you've got like initiatives like 1% for the planet. Some businesses or business owners might be familiar with that, right? Where you commit, it's kind of like a pledge. You commit to give 1% of your profits to environmental causes. I know there's some local companies in town that are part of 1% for the planet, right? So they're also trying to tackle maybe similar problems like the fishing net problem, but they're doing it in a different way. They're doing it kind of as this like cause marketing piece as part of their venture. And so like just looking at that, like how do you solve fishing net pollution, right, in the bays? Those are very different business solutions. One is maybe a little bit more of a marketing kind of branding perspective. Another one is like central to the creation of our venture, this Barrio skateboard company. And so that, to me, the spectrum of social entrepreneurship can kind of fall along that continuum a bit.
Yeah, Yeah, I find it that interesting, that the balance between what came first. I think we've talked a little bit about that. We called it the chicken and the egg scenario a little bit. And how do businesses establish this social entrepreneurship? Is it important that it's established, kind of at the get-go before the business is started, or is it something that can be adopted along the line of the business?
Yeah. I think I guess which one is the chicken and which one is the egg. I do think that ideally it needs to be a part of your core value. So when you look at values both personally and organizationally, it really is hard to kind of change your value. Those are some things that are kind of founded, maybe like as an individual in your early formative years. So as an organization, the people who bring the organization, the founders and the investors or the original stakeholders. So I think it's harder to establish a business and then interject these social components unless you start to shift the values of the organization. So I do think that if you look at your values, take a hard look at what it is you're trying to achieve by focusing more on people, planet, and profit, and you're authentic behind it, you can naturally evolve. But to bring that marketing component and think that you're going to create some advantageous opportunity to brand your organization as part of this social good when authentically it's not, it would be hard to gain that market share, bring in those consumers, and then have them stick with you and have brand loyalty along the way. So I think there's an aspect of self and kind of business discovery that you need to go through to determine if that's something that's authentic to the business.
Mm-hmm.
I really like that, because I think we're seeing an evolution, and consumers have a much shorter tolerance to inauthentic businesses. I think they can tell right when something is not aligned with your values. And I love that that's part of the evolution, is like businesses have to meet a higher bar now, because you can't just slap on, a charity that you're donating on the side if it's not actually like integral to the values of your company. So I think it's even more important for businesses nowadays to consider that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right. And when we were preparing for this conversation, I know that may come up a little bit later, but we were talking about B Corp corporations. So the certified B corporations, I mean, ultimately they're trying to meet the higher standards around social and environmental performance. So if anybody's interested, I can put this in the chat as well, but bcorporation.net. And they have a very strong verification and embedding process for businesses who can be certified. So they look at even your legal accountability and your public transparency. And some of the companies, I know that, Elizabeth, you had asked this about companies that are kind of meeting this standard. So Patagonia is one, Ben and Jerry's, New Belgium Brewing. I mean, these are all pretty popular contemporary brands, but they actually have accounting firms, financial institutions, engineering firms that have gone through this rigorous process to be verified as a B Corp. And it's really amazing, because I think we think of Tom's Shoes and we think of these environmental businesses that are producing a product that makes you feel good, but there's so much more behind the scenes that they need to follow to fit that triple bottom line.
Yeah, and I might just as another example in terms of large businesses, just mention Walmart and maybe Verizon real quickly, since they're known brands. Some people may not be aware of their commitments, and I think it also demonstrates the sort of conflicted nature of the spectrum that Spud sort of laid out. No company is perfect, but Walmart, actually, this goes back to the 90s. And early 2000s with Katrina, they had a bit of an awakening that was caused by, mistreatment of workers, but also Katrina showed them the good that they could do in the world because of their supply chain prowess, essentially. So they set about three really ambitious goals: to be 100% powered with renewable energy, to produce zero waste, and I think the third one was something along the lines of helping their customers lead more, happier and more sort of efficient lives and so forth. So that's Walmart, and Walmart's got a commitment now to be, I just was looking at their website, they set a goal to become the world's first regenerative company, to have zero emissions by 2040, protect, manage, or restore at least 50 million acres of land and 1 million square miles of ocean by 2030. So Walmart's an interesting example because, of course, they're so massive, and they've also been criticized a lot for, collapsing small businesses when they come in, and also for their treatment of workers, and yet they and we have graduates working for Walmart, working in sustainability, and from my perspective, it's a very authentic commitment on their part. And yet there's still, another sort of, they do get criticized, and perhaps that's, that makes sense. And then Verizon, I would just mention, so Verizon, just on the climate change side, so Verizon just last year had the largest green bond ever in telecommunications, $1 billion. And a green bond is just a bond, but you've essentially committed to use those funds for environmental purposes in this case, and they're investing a lot in renewable energy with that, and for themselves to be carbon neutral by 2035. So in terms of large businesses, I mean, there's a lot of examples, which is a good thing. But those are two that I would call out just because they're known brands.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting that we kind of started this talk saying, don't abandon your value proposition or your core values of your company. And I think that's a good way that small businesses listening can understand that, abandoning something, your core values to pursue social entrepreneurship could be associated with risks. But we kind of finished up saying, well, look, Walmart is shifting gradually into this more sustainable model or socially acceptable model. So I think that it is possible to shift your core values, and we can learn a lot by looking at some of these larger businesses. So that's kind of why we started at this high level large business. But there's also a lot of talk about what is social entrepreneurship. And I think, Kelly, you alluded to this, that, a lot of people just think of Tom's shoes or Bombas socks, where, you're getting something to make you feel good about, social entrepreneurship. What are some other examples? We've talked about, even, how it looks from the back end, internally, social entrepreneurship. Do you guys have some other examples of companies that are participating in social entrepreneurship that might not be something that's so visible?
Well, one that I'll call out, because we haven't talked about as much about the social impact side, is a favorite example of mine is a new venture fund called Harlem Capital. And it was started to provide funding to 1,000 Black-owned startups. They started with a goal of raising $1 million, and my understanding as of recently, I think they're over 50 million or something that they have raised. So that's an example of what I would call very much a social enterprise, which is addressing not the environmental issues, but the many centuries old discrimination against people of color who still have lack of access to capital, bank loans, and face a number of other kinds of prejudicial treatment by financial institutions of that nature. So Harlem Capital, people can look it up, but that's an example. One other I'll throw out that we focused on a few years ago, it's also in the finance area, is called C-Note. So C-Note is another sort of impact investing company, kind of operates as a bank. Instead of putting your money in a bank, you can park your money in the same way that you would for not necessarily a checking account, but maybe a money market account. And C-Note takes that money and invests it through community development financial institutions and minority and women-owned businesses. So a couple of examples in the financial area, since we haven't touched on sort of finance in social enterprise, and that address some of the social and economic inequity types of issues.
Yeah, great examples.
Mm-hmm.
So, Kelly, do you guys have any examples of some other types of social entrepreneurs?
Yeah, I mean, I think we could probably spend an entire hour just rattling off companies that all of us are really inspired by, and I've got a long list. Two groups that I would direct people to if you want to go do some digging on your own, if there's like an industry that really excites you. One is a group called Echoing Green, and another one, Ashoka. Both of those are really well known in the social entrepreneurship space and have their own fellowship programs. And so you can go see the, I don't know how many it is, 20, 30 fellows each year that they bring on, each of which is running a really unique kind of social venture. One of the groups, this one does not get talked about very often, but has inspired me recently, is a young entrepreneur. His name's Tony, and he started a company called Weird Enough Productions. And he was really frustrated with media representation and not seeing people that looked like him in the media landscape. And so he created kind of this like two-pronged company. So on one end, he has this curriculum that he sells to school districts that teaches about media representation through kind of comics and stuff. And then with the revenue that's generated from that kind of like education platform that he sells, he runs a media production company, and he creates comics and all kinds of really cool stuff that puts media representation at the center of the storytelling. And so it's this really interesting, like it's got an education arm to it, and then it also has like an entertainment arm to it and a storytelling arm. And so the thing that excites me about social entrepreneurship is you see entrepreneurs that are tackling problems that you wouldn't necessarily think like, oh, I'm going to go create a company around media misrepresentation and bias, right? Like that's not usually people's starting point for like launching a venture. But that's where I get really inspired, is seeing how people are using revenue generation as a way to tackle some of these like bigger, hairy problems like media bias.
I agree, Spud. One of the ones that I was recently introduced to is 4Ocean, and we talked a little bit about this in our kind of pre-conversation. So they actually had a problem, or wanted to solve a problem, of removing plastic from oceans. So their business model was to sell bracelets or T-shirts or bags that have 4Ocean on it. And when they sell those products, that funding goes to help remove 1 pound of plastic from the ocean. So instead of figuring out a way how to sell the items they want to sell with a social tinge to it, they took the problem and created a business model revenue to help generate funds to be able to solve the problem. So I like that as well. Same kind of theory and thought.
Yeah, I love all your kind of outside of the box entrepreneurs entities. I think they're great examples, because one thing, I would like to be friends with the person Spud mentioned that had the comment, and these are the type of people that you'd like to have dinner with and just hear like their stories. And one thing that I keep talking about every week, most of the time this theme comes up, is entrepreneurship is an art, right? These are their artists, this is their craft, their business is their craft, and in seeing how they take their craft and they turn it into something beautiful and something that gives back, and linking all these causes together in creative ways is a form of artwork. So I think that's really cool. And so, the Small Business Development Center works with small businesses. And so we've talked a lot about these kind of larger businesses. And, if there's a small business owner listening today, like, okay, that's great, but, I'm kind of struggling just making payroll right now. There's more to, social entrepreneurship. There could be social service, social activism. What examples have we seen in the community to kind of root around just social service that helps your business just kind of get out there, or you just pursue your passion or help do good in the community? Have you guys seen examples of that during the pandemic?
I'll mention a favorite example that we've done some work with Good Day Cafe, which I think we've all probably been to, and I think it's a great example of social enterprise, because it was a recognition by a nonprofit that serves families with children with disabilities, that part of what they wanted to provide more of was job training and job placement types of services. And of course, they speak about this, even more eloquently than I can. But one of the things that they thought, well, why don't we start a cafe, right? Because at the cafe, we could actually provide employment for people with disabilities. And so they did that. And of course, Good Day Cafe comes to be. And to me, what's important about Good Day Cafe is the depth at which they understand the problem they're trying to solve. Which to me, and this is certainly on the continuum that Spud gave us before, if you're really going to make a difference socially, you certainly need to run a profitable business. So they need to be profitable as a cafe. and they've struggled during the pandemic as much as anybody. But they also you need to understand the social issues, the issues around, in their case, mental and intellectual disabilities, which of course they understand intimately because of their, they were, I guess a Good Day Cafe grew out of strawberry fields. So to me, Good Day Cafe is such a great example because of their intimate understanding of the problem they're trying to solve. And that one of the insights that comes when you understand the problem, that I remember that was an aha moment for myself and my students when we worked with them in the spring was, you're really serving not these individuals that have jobs at Good Day Cafe, but their families. I know that probably seems really obvious, but those kinds of insights are just gold. And you don't get those just by saying, hey, I'm really passionate about people with disabilities. I'm going to go solve this thing, because you can be overly passionate and hit the wrong mark because you haven't humbled yourself first to be a student of the issue that you're trying to solve. And so Good Day Cafe is one of my favorite local examples. It was not necessarily a result of the pandemic, to your question, Elizabeth, but it's just one of my favorite local examples of social enterprise because of the reasons that that I shared.
Absolutely. I love Good Day Cafe. I've linked them into the chat, both on Facebook and in Zoom. So definitely visit them. And I would like to see them open in every community across the country. The mission that they do is so great. Spud and Kelly, do you have any examples of businesses locally that done stuff either in the pandemic or before, or just made it a mission?
Yeah, well, and maybe this is going a little side tangent here, but maybe I'll come back to your question. But what Eric shared that got me thinking is, right, this spectrum of social entrepreneurship takes on so many different forms, especially if you're already running a business versus starting one from the ground up, as Kelly was talking about. But central to pretty much any business is an element of hiring. And this idea that, like, we've been doing this work all along, like, a job is something that gives you so much dignity and worth in this world. And so regardless of where your starting point is as a business owner or entrepreneur, right, we all hire people to some degree. And I think there's a lot that can be done, kind of building off the Good Day Cafe example, of how do you make that hiring process more open, more accessible to other folks. A few examples, this one isn't locally, but that inspires me. I think we mentioned Ben & Jerry's on here. One of the hidden companies behind Ben & Jerry's that not as many people know about is the company that makes all of the brownies for their ice creams. And it's called Grayston, I think, Bakery. I might be pronouncing that wrong, but they've got a really cool policy called an open hiring policy, where they accept anybody. As soon as you apply, you're on their wait list, and they just kind of count down. So there's no interview process or anything like that. And it's designed to people who might struggle. Maybe they've got a harder background that they're coming from, and it's more difficult for them to get a job. This open hiring policy that this bakery has instituted has made it, one, way cheaper for the business to run, because they don't have to deal with all of the headaches of interviewing and trying to find the right candidate. They invest all of the energy that typically would go to recruitment towards professional development of the people that they hire, right? So we're going to help equip anybody who's coming into our company. We'll train you, we'll get you up to speed, and we'll give you a fair shot at diving into a job and having that dignity. So I think there's like policies that any business can really integrate in. And there's so many good examples, like Good Day Cafe. Rising Tide Car Wash is another one if people want to look into. It's a car wash that employs folks that are on the spectrum and have autism. It's a really great kind of connection point, because there's a lot of like attention to detail. And so a car wash has that built into their business model, right? And so it was started by a family that, their one of their kids was on the spectrum, and they wanted to create, a company that could support them and have kind of a fair job. And so lots and lots of examples like that I think exist out there. And Good Day Cafe is obviously a great local example of that. So that was a side, that wasn't your actual question, but that's what came to mind as Eric was talking. So
And just as a kind of a short bookend, we've talked about people, planet, and profit. So through the global coronavirus, I mean, so many small businesses have suffered, and even though some of them have received some financial compensation from their federal government, many small businesses have really tried to put the people first. So it is people, planet, profit. So if there's anything that you need to cut or shortcuts that you need to make to keep your business above board, people is probably the last thing you'd want to do. I have an example of my sister's cafe bakery in Orange Beach, Alabama. They were able to maintain all of their employees, but what they did was they fed their employees every day. So they had multiple meals. They didn't cut anybody from payroll, but they were able to provide meals to all staff and employees, while other organizations were firing or putting people on furlough. So there are some things that you can do to maintain the people within your organization. Maybe not, if you can't make payroll, maybe you can do things like use resources within your organization to kind of offset what might traditionally be a salary. So those are maybe some innovative things you can do that still focus on the social component too.
Yeah, that's great. And we're getting close to time, and I want to leave some time to talk a little bit about tips on ways small businesses can start to implement. Maybe it's not a full-on social entrepreneurship model, but social activism. Kelly, you alluded to some ways to pivot or putting people first. So, are there any ideas on how businesses, especially now in a pandemic, can start to think a lot more along the social spectrum, or maybe they want to, they just don't know what they can do? Do we have any tips that we can offer?
Well, I just would jump in and say that I think in some ways the answer is like incredibly obvious and so simple, and that is to say that it really, you need to start probably where you already are in terms of what are the issues that you are most passionate about, the networks that you're already a part of, the communities that you're already, a part of, and the unique sort of skills, assets, technology, even, depending on what the kind of company you are that you have. And when you sort of look at those together, that's kind of the secret sauce. But I would say that sort of there's a psychological and emotional, maybe even spiritual component to this, in the sense that if your business can't make payroll, and you've decided to shutter, at least for the time being, just emotionally, that's an incredible toll on you. And you can't, and it's very difficult in that state to think creatively. So in some ways, I think what social entrepreneurship can provide at this moment is maybe the green light or the license, or maybe the excuse or the reason, to come off the sidelines or off the couch, or maybe to reignite that strategic entrepreneurial spirit that you have as an entrepreneur that's probably been beaten down this year, and to say, what if I looked at business more broadly? I know I can't make a profit, maybe for the next, 3 to 6 months or whatever it might be. But if I looked more broadly of how I can make a difference, how could I use, again, this combination of unique networks, unique skills and assets, and some issue that I'm passionate about, whether it's disabilities or homelessness, or maybe I'm just really good at fishing and I can, teach fishing to at-risk youth or something like that. It's not something really novel that you have to go out of your comfort zone. You probably want to be in your comfort zone and do what only you can do. And maybe this gives you an opportunity to do that in a creative way. So that's what I would, one thought I wanted to share.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point, because this year, if it's been nothing to small business owners, it's been incredibly difficult just to continue to apply for the PPP loan and do the paperwork and all these things that take us away from the passion, and so it's a great point, giving yourself permission to just maybe pursue that passion again might be the start of refinding that joy in entrepreneurship, because this year has been, just chasing one loan, the next grant program, the relief programs, the PPE, all of those things. So great point, Eric.
Mm-hmm.
But Kelly, what about you? You kind of tips for these entrepreneurs that, they're looking to have a social cause behind their company?
I think you're on mute, Kelly.
I'd like just to add what Eric said. It's been interesting because there are a lot of businesses who have failed over the last 10 months. And they have done, some research and looked into some of the businesses, maybe some of the larger business, let's say some of the, Fortune 500 companies that had been failing for quite a while. They just weren't producing the product or the service, or they were getting, beaten out in a market that had a more customer focused business model. And so I think if you're a small business and you're struggling right now, and if you look around at some of the other businesses that are doing well, what is it that they're doing well that's allowed them to stay above board? Are they really embracing their customer service policy? Are they putting people first? Are they focusing on local products? Are they doing something that's building brand loyalty that even through the most challenging of times, both economic and social, they still have customers coming to them? There are a couple of local businesses in Center County I can think of. Tate Farm, for example, they've ran out of Christmas trees because everybody's wanting to buy Christmas trees now to have a home down, a family home Christmas. And so they've benefited from that, but they have this really beautiful little contemporary little craft store. And people have been going in there to just buy and purchase from them because they love that they're local and they've built a relationship with their customers. So Tate Farm is actually doing really, really well right now. Another one, Elk Creek Cafe in Milheim, they put out a crowdsourcing pitch several months ago. They were really struggling. I think they brought in $25,000 from people who had been patroning them, but they had to come out and say, look, we're really struggling. And people just $25, $50, $75. And then they really focused on takeout. And because they had built such brand loyalty and built strong, authentic relationships with their customers, they've been able to stay afloat as well. So I think that if you didn't put customer first and you didn't build that brand loyalty and that relationship with your customers, that could be a reason why you just don't have that same level of engagement and involvement with your customers. So it might, like Eric was saying, it might be time to step back into that realm and reprioritize your values.
Yeah. I just want to make a quick comment on that, and then I know Spud wants to, but there was something I wanted to mention, and just a simple idea that Kelly, I think, and I were both pointing to, and that is business is a social activity. And I was looking at some research, which I won't get into, from faculty Charlene Zietsma within SMEAL, but there was this simple nugget I thought that Kelly was just talking about, which to me is, even if your business falters, you don't have to, and I'm saying this with great humility, right? Because I'm not a local business owner. So, but the idea is that even though your business is faltering, that doesn't mean the social ties have to falter. Because eventually the business is going to come back, and it's going to rely on the strength and vibrancy of those social ties. So how do you continue to strengthen those ties even while the business is faltering? I thought that was a really interesting idea. That's from some work that they did in Bangladesh. And I love Kelly's example of that locally with Elk Creek Cafe. So I just wanted to make that point about strengthening the social ties. I thought it's really interesting.
Yeah, great, because any leader or organization that that oftentimes your proven ability or your strength comes through how you handle crisis. So if you and your customer, as a business and a customer or consumer, can build a relationship to get through this crisis together, if both of you can pivot together, I mean, talk about the loyalty that you'll maintain through a crisis, and then those people will maybe stay with you for the long haul. So this could be a great opportunity for some businesses that had been kind of hanging on the edge or resting on their laurels. Like, this is the time to turn up the notch. And I think that for those attending, you'll be able to find some opportunity here.
Excellent point. So do you want to finish this up? Do you have any other, any last minute ads?
Yeah, I'll echo everything that was shared there. I'll put one book on people's radars. So if you're an entrepreneur right now, wondering how do you make the most of this crisis, right? Don't ever waste a good crisis. It's obviously there is a headspace of we just need to survive through this next window. And that's definitely true. But I want to zoom out of that, right? And so like if we think 2-3 years from now, when we look back on this time with an entrepreneur hat on, I want to be asking the question, what did I learn? How did I evolve my business in a really significant way because of that crisis? And my worry is actually, and this is a weird worry, but you hear of a lot of folks saying, and my wife says this a lot, and she works at the university, and right, we evolved 5 years, right? We progressed 5 years technologically in the last 5 months, and we would have never imagined that type of leap was possible. And so as a business owner and having the lens that I work with very different businesses, so small little arts innovation centers, nonprofits, real estate companies, big Silicon Valley companies. So like I've seen inside different types of companies during this crisis. In a couple months, in a year from now, companies are going to have evolved in really significant ways, and more so than just, it's going to be easier for people to work remotely now, right, than having to come into the office. That's like a really simple one that everybody goes to that as an example because it's a little more feeling. But even more significantly, businesses will have evolved in this year. And so I think as a business owner, it's important for you to be thinking about, how do I make sure that I'm evolving my company at the speed that is happening around me? Because if we don't, businesses are going to look really different a year from now. And I think we need to, that's a hard thing to juggle as a business owner. I can feel it because I'm the one submitting all the like loan applications, and I'm doing all of that. And it's difficult, right? And there's a lot of chaos that you're juggling. But at the same time, you've got to be thinking more structurally. And so the book that I put on people's radars is called Reinventing Organizations. And it's all about reimagining the internal stuff that makes your business really great. Right? Like, how do people make decisions? How do you handle hiring practices? Like all of that kind of stuff, the value stuff. How is that like deeply integrated into the management and structure of your organization? And so now's the time to be thinking about those structural changes, because we're all forced to change. And so we might as well embrace it to the fullest, so that a year, 2 years from now, you know, we're proud of the new type of businesses that we're leading, and we didn't miss the boat at that point. So that's the homework assignment I'd put on people's radar. If you have the time over the holidays, go check out Reinventing Organizations.
That's a great tip, Spud. Thank you so much for that. And I think that's a great way to finish up. We've kind of talked a lot about social entrepreneurship, but you know, now is the time, especially, you know, if you're feeling overwhelmed in a business, to kind of reevaluate those processes or those focuses in your business. So great book. I've dropped it into both the chat and the Zoom and the Facebook. Good holiday reading. So I'd like to finish up. We do this every week on Quick Connect. It's just a way for our audience to get to know our panelists a little bit better. I'd like to finish up with some rapid fire questions. And this first one will kind of link the whole chat together. And we'll start with you, Kelly. What if the audience had one takeaway from today's session, what would you want it to be?
One of my favorite taglines I got from one of my professors in corporate innovation entrepreneurship is disruption plus discovery equals innovation. So take advantage of this disruption and create an opportunity for your business.
That's a great takeaway. Thank you. All right, Eric, how about you? If there was one takeaway from today's discussion, what would you want it to be?
Mine would be, I wrote one knowing you were going to ask that. So strengthen social ties, even if economic ones suffer. You'll strengthen your company, unleash creativity through generosity, and endear yourself to your community.
I like that. That's good. I especially, you know, if business owners are feeling right now, like, what can I do next? That's a very easy, tangible task that we all can pursue. Spud, take away from today?
Yeah, the thing that's coming up for me is don't be afraid to prototype a solution on how the social component of this might weave into your business. Now's the time to prototype it. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work, and people will forgive you. And there will be 10 other prototypes that are happening in other businesses. So try it, right? See what happens if you tweak a hiring practice or tweak a way that you spend certain profits or handle whatever it might be internally. So yeah, now's the time to prototype those things.
Good point. You know, customers have changed, right? They've all changed. We've changed so much over the past 9 months. So it's a good time to maybe test out some of those things. And I think entrepreneurs need permission sometimes to make changes, because we're like, we just need to go back to what was making us money, right? And so permission to make changes right now, that's a good takeaway. So thank you, Spud. All right, my next question is, who is your favorite entrepreneur and why? And I know it's often hard to nail down just one, but maybe someone who's inspiring to each of you. So Eric, why don't you start us out with this one?
I forgot you were going to ask us this. So I'm gonna choose a former Smeal student named Nick Eunice, and you can go to Eunice Brands or Eunice Shoewear or something. Probably Elizabeth will look that up quickly before I'm even done, and put it in the chat. So Nick Eunice has a company in Pittsburgh where they are 3D printing shoes that are made from, in part, from ocean plastics, and those shoes themselves can be returned and made into new shoes. So zero waste, closed loop, using advanced technology, pretty cool, and a Penn State student.
Yep, I know that brand. I've seen it come across my radar a few times.
Yeah.
Kelly, how about you? Favorite entrepreneur and why?
So I'm going to say this just because of timing in my graduate school research, is Elon Musk. And the reason why is because we have several Smeal alum who work for Tesla. And I had to interview a few of them as far as gaining insight into Tesla's culture. And one of the things that I learned from the Smeal alum was that everybody who's brought into Tesla, they need to think outside the box. They need to be innovators, need to be creative, don't necessarily get stuck to the status quo. And that's really just as Spud was speaking to, just around hiring. And so this alum was saying that we really have the freedom to be creative, to innovate, to create opportunities, be entrepreneurs within the organization. So I know that Tesla and Elon have a lot attached to that. There's a lot to unpack there. But just having that personal insight into the culture that he's building inside that organization was really insightful.
Yeah, absolutely. You're actually the second panelist to choose him as your favorite entrepreneur. There's lots of great reasons to follow Elon Musk and what he does, for sure. How about you, Sved? Do you want to finish us up with our favorite entrepreneur?
Yeah, I'll do a name that I'm sure no one knows. His name's Jason Roberts, and he's down in Texas. He runs a company called Better Block. And the premise is that we all have the ability to create better blocks, better communities, better neighborhoods. And so when we talk about small business, right, small businesses are the fabric of really great, thriving communities. And so this company, Better Block, helps facilitate experiences to empower entrepreneurs to create better communities in the small communities that they're a part of. And so I've been super inspired by him. The story that has always, I think, has solidified him on the top of my like entrepreneur people I'd love to meet someday list is he was really frustrated that there weren't bike lanes in his town, right? So maybe as a business owner, you're like, hey, I really care about biking and I want to support my employees to be able to bike into their office easier. And so rather than like go through planning processes and city council and getting it approved to like get a bike lane, he went to Walmart, I assume, and he bought every plunger that they had in their store. And overnight he glued them to the road and created his own pop-up bike lane. And in the morning, no one could tell that it wasn't a properly built bike lane. It looked like one, but it was just plungers glued to the street. And that was the impetus to actually show like, hey, here's a prototype. People started using it because they saw a bike lane, a divided bike lane. And that created this like culture change in his community. And so like doing little things like that, right, putting on that lens during this time, I think is really important. So Jason Roberts, Better Block, one of my favorite entrepreneurs.
Very cool. I love his boldness. That's fun.
Yeah.
All right, let's finish up, and I'm going to toss this one back to you, Spud, just to keep it even. There's 3 questions, so you can start us off with this one. And can you describe your favorite small business experience?
Yeah, so it has nothing to do with business or management or anything like that. It's all the people thing. We keep talking about this, the social connections. Part of CoSpace, the home that we run to support young creative entrepreneurs. We give each person, when they move into the home, they get a little rock with the word hope engraved on it. And the belief is that this community is hopefully going to give you the hope you need to create the change in the world. And so the experiences that stand out in my mind are when alumni reach back to us and say, hey, that rock still sits on my bedside stand, right? And it reminds me of the power of community and the power of leaning into innovation and creating change. And I think businesses are such a source of hope in the world. And so those little hope rocks are these like artifacts that I know exist now in the world in hundreds of different alumni. And that's what keeps me doing the work that I do.
I love that. That's a great example. And I think it's something so small that CoSpace has done. I mean, it costs you probably barely anything, and it's created a magnifying effect. So I think that's a great example of how, little things can be huge and change. Um, Kelly, how about you? Favorite small business experience and why?
So I'll stick to kind of a local farm theme. So Windswept Farm that also has Refarm Cafe. So Duke and Monica Gastiger that have founded that 55-acre organic farm. So several years ago, I started going out there and helping to harvest vegetables and produce. And in return for my couple of hours of volunteer, they would send me home with a beautiful bag of produce. Some of the things I just picked and some other things that have been on hold for CSA, but that relationship that they've built with their volunteers allows us to feel like we're contributing to the farming and the vision and the values of their farm. And then when we actually go and patron, again, we're part of this whole community. So I love supporting them. And they're an example of a small business that's been able to stay afloat through this crisis because of that relationship they're building with their consumers and volunteers and friends.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think, one of the themes I found throughout this pandemic from all my panelists is that your customers have all the answers. And so you can keep coming back to, if you want to know where to go next, you just talk to your customers. And I think that creating those relationships has been kind of a common theme. Eric, you want to finish us up, your favorite small business experience?
I had the most time to think about it, so I appreciate it. It's been great. This has been a lot of fun, and always learn a lot from Kelly and Spud. This has been great, Elizabeth. So I guess mine's in the theme of investing in my marriage and investing locally. So the one I thought of was lunch dates at Otto's Pub and Brewery with my wife, Joanne. We've been doing that for almost 10 years, believe it or not, every Friday, except during the pandemic, of course. And I love that because to me, it shows the connection between business and marital success, I guess. Well, and the connection, honestly, right, between the success of businesses and the success of our neighborhoods and lives, they're very closely tied. Also, Otto supports local agriculture, and thanks to Roger and Otto's, they've given to Clearwater Conservancy for decades. Also, I serve on the board there, and Clearwater's preserved over 8,000 acres locally. So, you just have this interesting convergence when you support local, strengthening the marriage, strengthening local business, supporting local agriculture, so that's my favorite local business experience.
Go ahead, Kelly. It looks like you want
Eric, I was just going to tell you, so my father does the same thing. He and his wife have been getting in their car every Wednesday for like 7 years and no plans, just drive to a locally owned restaurant. It could be an hour and a half, 2 hours away, but that's like a whole day trip. I mean, they're retired, but same thing every Wednesday. Oh, I love it. That's really awesome. Fun.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. I think that's such a great point, just to kind of finish off this talk that, our small businesses listening are not only, just part of the community, but they're helping to create community. And so thank you all so much for coming on and just lending your expertise to this subject. I think, beyond, where we started with very large businesses, we've been able to kind of talk about weaving in that social aspect and strengthening those social ties within not only our businesses, but our communities as well. So thank you to each of our panelists for joining us today. If you're joining us online or if you've been in Zoom, I want to thank you for joining us and talk a little bit about what the Sbdc does real quick. If you haven't heard of the Sbdc, or if you're just learning about the Sbdc, one of the things we do is consulting. We offer free one-on-one consulting to small businesses. So if you're looking to kind of follow through with some of these ideas, you can work with a business consultant and we can help you come up with a game plan around that. We also do training. We offer classes to help businesses along their journey, whether it be from QuickBooks to training on business plans and even further down the line, resilience training and those kind of things. Information services, resources, and referrals to other experts within the community. We offer all these services free of charge at the Penn State Sbdc. Next week, we're going to be talking to some business owners who actually started businesses in 2020. So successful startups of 2020, we'll be doing a showcase next week to talk to some business owners who made it through, who had an idea at the beginning of the year and actually opened at the end of the year. So we have 5 great guests from different counties around our Penn State Sbdc coverage zone. So we'll be talking to those next week. If you have any questions for the Sbdc, or if you'd like to get in contact with us, you can reach us at sbdc.psu.edu. We are seeing everybody remote through Zoom, so we can do consultations either virtually or via phone. And finally, I'd just like to point out that we are on social media. This is probably one of the best ways to get in touch with us or to follow us, because we have a lot of programming resources. We also have resources for grants and loans and different COVID-related resources as they come up. So we try to stay up to date with whatever's going on, not only federally, but also locally and statewide. So follow us on our social media platforms. Thank you so much for joining us. And next week, again, at noon, we'll be doing a talk on business owners that have successfully started. So join us for that and see what they've done this year to open up and what they have to look forward to in 2021. Thank you to my panel for joining us, and we will see you guys next week.